Have you ever trusted God and still lost everything? Have you ever prayed, but heaven stayed silent? Have you ever looked around and wondered why the wicked rise, while the faithful are buried beneath sorrow? There comes a moment in every believer's life when the skies close up, when the voice of God goes quiet, and all you're left with is the echo of your pain. It's not punishment, it's not rejection, it's a test, and not the kind with obvious questions or easy answers. No, this one is sacred. This is the kind of test that comes when everything falls apart and all you have left is your yes to God. This is not a story for those who've never suffered, not for the ones who've lived untouched by pain. This is for the weary, the betrayed, the believers who kept standing even when everything else crumbled. What do you do when your prayers don't move mountains? When your fasting doesn't fix the storm? When your worship echoes into silence? What if faith means trusting even when God says nothing? This is the place where many walk away, when the pain gets too deep, the loss too sharp, the silence too loud. Many leave the path, but a few, a rare few, choose to stay, to sit in the ashes, to believe not because of the blessings, but in spite of their absence. That's where this story begins. Not in a palace, not in prosperity, but in silence, in the stillness where even angels hold their breath, because what's about to happen in the unseen realm will shake the heavens and test the earth. The eyes of heaven were watching, the courtrooms of the divine prepared for a trial unlike any before. A man, blameless, upright, was about to walk through fire, not because of his sin, but because of his strength, because sometimes God trusts you with suffering. Sometimes He chooses you to carry the weight others couldn't bear, to reveal His glory, not through escape, but through endurance. This is not a tale of karma. It's not cause and effect. It's not do good, get good. This is deeper. This is the anatomy of true faith, the kind that doesn't flinch in the fire, the kind that says, though He slay me, yet will I trust Him. Maybe you've been there. Maybe you are there, sitting in your own ashes, wondering what you did wrong, when in fact, heaven may be whispering, well done, stay the course. You were chosen for this, chosen to suffer, chosen to endure, chosen to reveal what real worship sounds like, not when the blessings are flowing, but when they've been taken away. He lost everything, and still he bowed. He heard nothing, and still he believed. He felt abandoned, and still he trusted. Why? Because to him, God was not a transaction. God was not a formula. God was everything. And though everything else fell, he held on to that. Can you trust God when He says nothing? Can you believe He's still good, even when your life doesn't look like it? Can you wait when the heavens go silent? Sometimes pain isn't punishment, it's promotion. And sometimes the test you never asked for is the testimony someone else will one day need. Picture it, a once blessed man, now sitting in dust, his skin covered in sores, his wealth gone, his children buried, his friends accusing, his wife pleading, curse God and die. But instead, he tears his robe, he shaves his head, he falls to the ground and worships, because real faith doesn't wait for the light to shine. It worships in the dark. And so, this is not just a story, it is the story, the one that echoes across every age of faith, when things don't make sense, when prayers go unanswered, when God is silent, and the only question left is, will you still believe? Will you hold on when heaven lets go of the mic? There was a man, not a perfect man, but a faithful one. He didn't seek fame. He didn't chase power. He just walked with God faithfully, quietly, humbly, until one day, his name was spoken in the courts of heaven, not by an enemy, not by an accuser, but by God himself, and what followed was the greatest test of faith the world has ever known. There once lived a man in the land of Uz. His name was Job, and before the storm ever touched his home, before grief ever found his doorstep, Job walked in the light of favor. He was blameless, not in the eyes of men alone, but in the eyes of God. Upright, God-fearing, turned away from evil, a man who stood tall, not because he had everything, but because he honored the one who gives and takes away. Job was wealthy, yes, but not just in gold or goats, not just in servants or standing. Job was rich in righteousness, 7 sons, 3 daughters, a legacy written in laughter and love. His household stretched wide across the hills, his livestock numbered in the thousands. His name carried weight, his words carried wisdom, his life, it seemed, was untouchable. And yet he never assumed it would always be so. Morning by morning he rose, before the sun crowned the mountains, before the dew dried on the grass. Job would offer burnt sacrifices, not for his own sin, but in case his children had cursed God in their hearts. He interceded for them in the silence, because Job understood something the world often forgets, that blessings are not guarantees, that favor is not the same as forever comfort, that even in peace, the soul must remain humble before the throne. This was the man God trusted, and above the hills of Uz, beyond the skies, the courts of heaven stirred. There came a day when the sons of God gathered before the Lord, and among them came the accuser, Satan, the adversary who walks to and fro upon the earth, sowing doubt, stirring pride, seeking whom he may devour. And the Lord, knowing all things, still asked the question, "Where have you come from?" And Satan, without fear, replied, "From roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth in it." But God, he had seen something, a man, a witness, a testimony in the dust. "Have you considered my servant Job?" He said, "There is no one on earth like him, blameless, upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." What a thing for God to say about a man. "Have you considered my servant?" Not because Job was perfect, but because he was faithful, not because he had all the answers, but because he walked in reverence. But Satan, as always, questioned the motive. Does Job fear God for nothing? The accuser sneered. Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You've blessed the work of his hands. His flock spread across the land. But stretch out your hand, strike all he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. A challenge, not just against Job, but against God himself. Because this was not merely about one man's devotion. This was about the nature of faith, the integrity of love, the purity of obedience. Do we worship God only when he gives? Do we trust him only in the comfort? Do we bow down only while the sun is shining? Satan believed that no man, no matter how righteous, would still worship in the ashes, but heaven was ready to prove otherwise. Very well, the Lord said. Everything he has is in your power, but on the man himself, do not lay a finger. And in that moment, the test began. Unseen by the world, unknown to Job, the curtain was pulled back in the unseen realm. Not a punishment, not a random act of cruelty, but a divine permission for a greater revelation. Because sometimes, the ones God trusts the most are tested the hardest, not to destroy them, but to reveal them. And so, the scene is set. The winds have not yet blown. The messengers have not yet come. But the silence of heaven is not abandonment. It is preparation. In the eyes of the world, Job was favored because of what he had. But in the eyes of God, Job was favored because of who he was. And soon, the world would see the difference. Because this is not the story of a wealthy man losing his wealth. This is not just about camels, or cattle, or coin. This is the story of a soul clinging to God in the darkness. This is the record of a man who would fall to his knees, not in defeat, but in devotion. A man who would whisper praise even as the sky collapsed. A man whose name would echo through generations, not because he was spared from suffering, but because he remained faithful through it. What if God pointed to you in heaven's courtroom? What if your life, your faith became the answer to the accuser's challenge? What if the trials you face are not evidence of God's absence, but proof of his trust? What if the storm was not a punishment, but a stage for worship, for witness, for the unseen to become undeniable? Before we go any further, pause with this truth. God saw Job before the suffering. He called him blameless before the test, and even in the permission of pain, he set boundaries, because even when God allows the fire, he controls the flame. Now, the story turns, the winds rise, the messengers run, loss will soon flood the gates. But before any of it begins, remember this: heaven was watching, and the story was not ending. It was just beginning. And then, on the darkest of days, the first messenger came running. Dust in his hair, terror in his voice, the kind of panic that breaks through silence like thunder. He didn't knock, he didn't wait. He burst through the gates of peace and shattered it.
The oxen were plowing, he said, breathless, and the donkeys grazing nearby, when the Sabaeans attacked. They struck down the servants with the sword. And I alone have escaped to tell you. Before Job could speak, before he could even process, another messenger appeared, not walking, running, and with him, another blow. The fire of God fell from the heavens. It burned up the sheep, and the servants with them. I alone have escaped to tell you. Job's eyes widened, his breath caught. But the storm was not done, because grief doesn't always come slowly. Sometimes it falls like waves, one after another, pulling everything under. Another messenger arrived. The Chaldeans. They formed 3 raiding parties. They swept down on the camels, killed the servants. I alone have escaped to tell you. 3 messengers, 3 disasters, 3 crushing losses. But then came the 4th, and this was the dagger through the heart. Your sons and daughters, they were feasting in the oldest brother's house, when suddenly a mighty wind swept in from the desert. It struck the 4 corners of the house. It collapsed, and they are gone. Silence. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of grief. The kind of stillness that follows unspeakable loss. 10 children, gone in a moment, not by war, not by famine, but by the wind. How do you breathe when your lungs are full of sorrow? How do you stand when the ground beneath you gives way? How do you worship when everything you prayed for is buried in the rubble? Job tore his robe. He shaved his head. He fell to the ground. And he worshipped. Yes, worshipped. Not because it didn't hurt. Not because he wasn't broken. But because even in the grief, God was still worthy. He didn't curse. He didn't run. He didn't shake his fist toward heaven. He fell to his knees and let the tears fall like rain. Naked I came from my mother's womb, he said, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Who says that? Who can say that? After this, only a man who knew something deeper. Only a heart that had already surrendered. Because Job didn't worship God for what he gave. He worshipped God for who he is. Let that sink in. He lost his wealth. He lost his workforce. He lost his children. And still, he said, "Blessed be the name of the Lord." What kind of faith sings in the ashes? What kind of soul bows in brokenness? What kind of man stares into the face of unexplainable loss and still believes? A man who knew God's silence is not God's absence. A man who trusted there is purpose in the pain. A man who believed heaven was still watching. In the unseen realm, silence fell. Even the accuser stood still, because Job did not curse, he did not turn away. He simply worshipped, and all of hell took notice. Suffering does not always mean you are wrong. Sometimes it means you are chosen. Sometimes the trial is not a punishment, but a promotion, a painful invitation into deeper trust, into unshakable faith, into the mystery where God reveals more of himself than comfort ever could. In all this, Job did not sin. He didn't charge God with wrongdoing. He didn't pretend he wasn't in pain, but he also didn't pretend that God had changed, because even when everything around him shifted, God did not. Maybe you felt it too, the sudden storm, the unexpected call, the kind of grief that doesn't knock, it just enters, and maybe, like Job, you've sat in silence and whispered through the ache. Why? Where is God? How could this happen? If that's you, don't turn away. You are not alone. You are not forgotten. And your suffering is not meaningless, because there is something happening behind the veil. Job didn't see the courtroom in heaven. He didn't hear Satan's challenge. He had no idea that God had already called him faithful, long before the fire ever fell. But still, he believed, and sometimes, belief is enough. Now, the sky grows darker, the winds have spoken, the children are gone, and the ashes begin to rise, but Job is still kneeling, and the story is not over, because faith does not end in the valley. It begins there. And yet, the enemy wasn't finished. The second wave was coming, and this time, it would strike Job himself. There are valleys, and then there are pits, places so low, so hollowed by grief, they swallow every last breath of hope. Job had lost everything, his children, his wealth, his legacy. But the enemy wasn't finished, because Satan doesn't just steal, he strikes deeper. And when the soul stands firm, he aims for the body. Then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord, and it began. A fever rose, a stinging in the skin, a twisting in the joints, and then the boils came. Painful, swelling, festering from head to toe. No relief, no rest, no healing. Job's body became a battlefield, his flesh a torment, his skin cracked and oozing. He itched, but scratching only tore it open more. So he found a shard of pottery, broken like him, and he scraped, and he bled, and he cried, but not out loud. He sat down in the ashes, among the remnants of what once was, a throne of sorrow, a seat of dust, the place where grief meets silence. Can you see him? This man, once clothed in robes of honor, now cloaked in sores and silence. This man, once surrounded by laughter, now alone in the soot. No servants, no family, no song, only the scraping sound of pottery against skin, and the quiet ache of a broken soul. Then, a voice pierced the silence, but it wasn't comfort, it wasn't prayer, it wasn't hope. It was her, his wife, once his closest friend, now a mirror of despair. She didn't touch him. She didn't kneel beside him. She looked at him and said, "Are you still holding on to your integrity? Curse God and die." 4 words, sharp as any sword. Curse God and die. Not spoken in hatred, but in surrender. Her hope was gone, her faith shattered. She'd buried 10 children. Now she watched her husband rot from the outside in, and she could not bear the silence of heaven. But Job still would not let go. Even here, on the ash heap, his soul clung to something unseen. He looked at her, and with love, not anger, he answered, "You speak as one of the foolish women speaks." Shall we accept good from God, and not adversity? What kind of man speaks like this? What kind of faith lives through this? Job didn't understand his pain, but he trusted the one who allowed it. He didn't have answers, but he had God. And then, they came. His friends. Eliphaz, Bildad, Zophar. 3 men, wise in their own eyes, men who had once admired him, men who had come from afar, when they heard of his ruin. At first, they were stunned. They didn't recognize him. Not this gaunt, trembling shadow of their friend, not this man covered in sores, sitting in the filth. And so, in sorrow, they wept. They tore their robes, they threw dust in the air, and they sat beside him. 7 days and 7 nights. No one spoke, because sometimes grief is too deep for words. But silence doesn't last forever. Eventually, words return, and not all words heal. The friends opened their mouths, and what poured out was not mercy, it was judgment. You must have sinned, they said. This doesn't happen to the innocent. Repent, and maybe God will restore you. They didn't understand the mystery. They couldn't see the heavenly courtroom. They believed in formulas. Do good, receive blessing. Do wrong, receive suffering. They saw suffering as proof of guilt, not as a test of righteousness. And Job? He listened, and his heart ached, not just from boils, not just from loss, but from betrayal. The friends who should have held his hand, instead pointed fingers. Have you felt that? Abandoned by those you love? Judged in your moment of need? Have your wounds been met with suspicion instead of compassion? If so, you're not alone. Job sat there too, on the ash heap, surrounded by voices that only made the pain worse. But listen, heaven was still watching. Though God was silent, he was not distant. Though Job heard no answer, God had not left the story. Sometimes the teacher is silent during the test, but silence is not absence. Job didn't get answers from his friends. He didn't get comfort from his wife. He didn't get relief from his sores, but still, deep within him, a flicker of faith remained. The ash heap became holy ground. The broken man became a witness. He would not curse. He would not quit. Even in the ache, he believed. This is faith in its rawest form. Not polished, not victorious, but honest. Not the kind of faith that dances in blessing, but the kind that kneels in pain. The kind that says, even if he slay me, yet will I trust him. So Job sat, and waited, and worshipped, not because he saw the way forward, but because he trusted the one who holds the future. And sometimes, that is enough. There is a kind of silence that screams louder than thunder, a silence so vast, it echoes. It's not the silence of peace. It's the silence of heaven when you're begging for answers, crying for justice, searching for God in the dark. And Job was in the dark. He had not cursed. He had not walked away. But now, he wanted to understand. Why? Why would the God he loved, the God who once smiled on his household, allow this storm to rage? What had he done? Why did I not perish at birth, or die as I came from the womb? Job 3:11. Job didn't just grieve his loss. He grieved his life. He looked back, and wished it had never begun. This was not weakness. This was wrestling. The kind of holy lament only the broken can sing. Have you ever prayed with clenched fists? Asked questions heaven didn't seem to answer? Have you felt the ache of, why me, Lord? Of, what did I do wrong? Then you've stood where Job stood. The friends couldn't take it anymore. His sorrow made them uncomfortable. His questions offended their theology. So one by one, they began to speak. Eliphaz spoke first. Elegant, controlled, convicted. Think now, who that was innocent ever perished? Job 4:7. He believed Job must have sinned, that suffering was a sign of guilt, that God blesses the upright and strikes the wicked. To him, Job's pain was proof. Then came Bildad, blunt, harsh, unyielding. If your children have sinned against him, he gave them over to the penalty of their sin. Job 8:4. A dagger to the soul. No compassion. No mercy. Only cold calculation masked as truth. Then Zophar. Proud. Aggressive. Certain. Know this. God exacts of you less than your guilt deserves. Job 11:6. Less than he deserves. Job had buried 10 children, lost everything he owned, was scraping sores from his skin, and Zophar says, it could have been worse. Each voice pressed down like a stone, but Job held his ground. He listened, he wept, and then he answered, you are miserable comforters, all of you. Job 16:2. He didn't claim perfection. He didn't say he had no flaws. But he knew, deep in his soul, that this was not punishment. It was a mystery, and mysteries demand faith, not formulas. Though he slay me, yet will I trust him. Job 13:15. This was Job's answer. Not a solution, not an escape. Trust. Not because he understood, but because he still believed in the one who did. But Job was still human, still weary, still waiting. Oh, that I knew where I might find him, that I might come even to his seat. Job 23:3. He wasn't cursing God. He was crying out for him. He longed for a courtroom, to plead his case before the Almighty. He wanted to be seen. He needed to be heard. But all around him was silence. He prayed, and no fire fell. He wept, and no voice thundered. He begged, and no angel came. Can you feel it? The weight of the weight. The sting of being right with God, but still being left in the dark. Job wasn't just enduring pain. He was enduring confusion. This is where spiritual maturity is born. It's easy to believe when prayers are answered, when healing comes, when doors open. But can you believe when there's only silence? Can you trust when nothing makes sense? This is the furnace of faith, the place where theology isn't just studied, it's lived. Job sat in that place. Not perfect, not emotionless, but faithful. He asked hard questions, he pushed back against his friends, he searched the skies for a sign. And yet, he kept turning his face toward heaven. Even in the darkness, he whispered truth. I know that my Redeemer lives. Job 19:25. There it was, a flicker of light in the black. A voice from the ashes still trusting in a coming Redeemer. Job didn't see the full picture. He didn't know the why. But his heart clung to who? The character of God. The justice of God. The mercy of God. And God was watching. He hadn't abandoned Job. He hadn't turned away. He was letting the trial run its course, not to crush him, but to reveal what was inside him. Job's suffering became a stage. His tears, a testimony. His questions, an invitation. Because in the debate, and in the darkness, Job never walked away from God. He ran toward him, even if limping, even if confused, even if it felt like God was nowhere to be found. This is the kind of faith that moves heaven. Not perfect, but pursuing. Not always understanding, but still holding on. And though God had not yet spoken, he was near. Though heaven was silent, it was not empty. And soon, very soon, the silence would break. And then, after the silence, after the ashes, after the wind of accusation had passed, God spoke. Not in a whisper, not in a vision, not through thunder or fire, but in a whirlwind, a storm that cracked open the heavens, a voice that rolled like the sea and shook the bones of the earth. Who is this that darkens counsel with words without knowledge? Job 38:2. God did not answer Job's questions. He asked his own. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Have you commanded the morning? Do you give the horse its strength? Can you loosen Orion's belt? Each question, a revelation. Each line, a reminder. The God Job longed to stand before was not small, not limited, not tame. He was the Creator, the Sustainer, the one whose thoughts are higher than the stars. God wasn't scolding Job. He was lifting his eyes out of the ash heap, out of the arguments, out of the shallow explanations of men, to see the grandeur of a God whose ways are not bound by man's understanding. And Job, dust-covered, scarred, trembling, listened. The same mouth that cried, "Why was I born?" now whispered something else. "Surely I spoke of things I did not understand." Job 42:3. My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Job 42:5. This was not a man who figured it all out. This was a man who finally saw God clearly. And in that seeing, he bowed, humbled, healed, held by holy awe. But there was one more test, one final act of obedience. Forgiveness. The friends who misrepresented truth, who twisted the knife of pain with false comfort. God was displeased with them, and yet, he did not strike them. Instead, he instructed them. Go to Job. Let him pray for you. Job 42:8. Why? Why would God make Job, the one they hurt, pray for them? Because this is how heaven heals. Through humility, through intercession, through obedience that costs something. Job could have turned away. He could have said, "They don't deserve it," and he would have been right. But Job wasn't living for what was right anymore. He was living for what was righteous. So he prayed. Imagine it. The man still bearing the scars, still surrounded by the graves of his children, still remembering every cruel word, stretching his hands toward heaven, on behalf of the very ones who misjudged him. He didn't just forgive, he interceded. And in that holy act, everything changed. The heavens, which once felt closed, opened. The silence, which once felt suffocating, lifted. And God, who once felt distant, drew near. And the Lord restored Job's fortunes when he prayed for his friends. Job 42:10. Not before, not after a sermon, not after an apology. When he prayed, restoration began. When Job obeyed, and heaven didn't just return what was lost, it gave double. Twice the livestock, twice the land, twice the legacy. But more than that, God gave Job peace. God gave Job presence. God gave Job himself. His brothers and sisters came again. His home filled with laughter again. New children were born, beautiful and blessed. And Job, the man once buried beneath grief, rose, not because life was the same, but because God had never left. His presence was worth more than anything, more than comfort, more than riches, more than all the possessions in the world, because in the end, presence is greater than possessions. This is the mystery of grace, that obedience unlocks what emotion cannot, that forgiveness births favor, that worship wins the war, even when answers never come. What if the turning point of your story isn't when God removes the suffering, but when you forgive the ones who added to it? What if healing begins, not in what you get back, but in what you let go? Job didn't just receive restoration. He became a witness, a living altar, a holy echo across time that says, God is faithful, even in the silence. God restores, even after devastation. God is near, even when he feels far away. The God who seemed quiet was working. The God who seemed absent was preparing a breakthrough. The God who allowed the storm was now speaking peace. And Job, the man who lost everything, was now the man who had seen God. I had heard of you, Job whispered through trembling lips, but now my eyes have seen you. Job 42:5. This was the treasure hidden beneath the ashes. This was the reward no man could steal. This was the why behind it all. Not the double portion, not the restored fortune, not even the returned joy, but sight. To see God, not in theory, not in hearsay, not in second-hand sermons or distant traditions, but in the raw, soul-stripped stillness after the storm has passed. To see him, and know that he was there all along. This is the greatest miracle. That pain did not destroy Job's faith, it deepened it. That suffering did not silence his worship, it refined it. That the loss did not erase his identity, it revealed it. He had once been the richest man in the East, respected, revered, blessed. But now, he was something far greater. He was a man who had seen God. Job didn't get answers. He got presence. He didn't win a debate. He entered the divine mystery. He didn't understand the plan. He trusted the person. Because in the end, the goal of faith was never just comfort, never just success, never just clarity. The goal was always God. He had been there in the silence. He had watched in the grief. He had listened to every tear, measured every breath, held every breaking moment in his hands. God had never left. And now, Job saw what only the broken can see. A God who meets us in the wilderness. A God who sits with us on the ash heap. A God who restores not only what was lost, but what was unknown. There's something sacred about being stripped of everything, only to find God still remains, still good, still sovereign, still near. We thought this was a story about suffering, but it's a story about sight, about a man who lost the world, but gained heaven's gaze. Yes, Job was blessed again. Yes, his wealth returned. Yes, his household flourished. But the greatest restoration wasn't what he received. It was who he became. He became a man who could bless others, because he had been broken himself. He became a man who no longer needed to control the outcome, because he had seen the one who holds it all. The winds that once tore through his household now whispered peace. The voice that thundered from the whirlwind now comforted like a father. And the pain that once begged for explanation was now surrendered to adoration. I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes, Job had cried, not out of shame, but out of awe, not because he was guilty of sin, but because he had glimpsed the holiness of God. And in that moment of holy revelation, every complaint fell silent, every question dissolved, every accusation turned into worship. This was not defeat. This was divine clarity. Job saw it now, not with human eyes, but with a heart reborn by fire. The same man who once sat scraping wounds with broken pottery now bowed low before the living God. And heaven was pleased. My servant Job has spoken of me what is right, God declared. While others speculated, Job sought. While others accused, Job endured. While others folded, Job worshipped. Heaven's verdict was not based on Job's perfection, but on his persistence. Not on his comfort, but on his closeness to God. And in the end, what mattered most was not what Job had lost, but what he had seen. God restored him, yes, gave him more than before, sons and daughters, wealth and legacy, long years and peaceful days. But none of that compared to the moment his soul beheld the divine. Friend, have you ever come to the place where your only prayer is presence? Where your only need is Him? Where every earthly answer fades before the light of, "Now my eyes have seen you"? Job's journey was never just his own. It was written for us. For those in ashes. For those with questions. For those who are tired of hearing about God and long to truly see Him. So maybe this chapter of your life, the one filled with loss and waiting, the one soaked in silence and unanswered prayers, isn't the end. Maybe it's the threshold to a clearer vision of God than you've ever known. Because God's silence is not His absence. And pain is not the enemy of purpose. And your story, like Job's, is being written with eternity in mind. Don't rush the process. Don't waste the ashes. Don't trade presents for possessions. There's something sacred in the waiting. Something holy in the heartache. Something divine in the dust. And when the clouds lift, when the silence breaks, when you hear His voice and sense His nearness, you will say it too. I had heard of you, but now, my eyes have seen you. The story is told. The ashes have settled. The whirlwind has passed. But now, the question turns to you, not to Job, not to the ancient past, but to the quiet, sacred present. What will you do in the silence? Because one day, you will stand where Job stood. Maybe you already have. A moment when heaven feels quiet, when your prayers hit the ceiling and fall back unanswered, when pain visits your doorstep uninvited, and everything you thought you understood about God is shaken to the core. When that day comes, and it will, you won't need all the answers. You'll need faith, not shallow belief, not borrowed conviction, but the kind of faith that worships with tears in its eyes, that kneels in ashes and still says, "Blessed be the name of the Lord." So let me ask you, gently, have you seen God in your suffering? Not just heard about Him in sermons or songs, but seen Him in the darkness? Have you discovered, like Job, that when everything is stripped away, presence is enough? Because sometimes, God reveals Himself clearest when life feels the most unclear. Sometimes, He is closest when He feels most distant. And sometimes, in the sacred silence, He is shaping something eternal in you. Will you trust Him? Even here, when the answers don't come, when the healing hasn't happened, when the doors stay shut and the nights stay long, there is a kind of obedience that doesn't wait for understanding. There is a kind of faith that holds God's hand even when it can't see His plan. That's the faith Job had. And that's the faith you're called to. Let Job's story be a seed in your soul, a reminder for your wilderness, a banner over your suffering. God was never absent. He was watching. He was waiting. He was working. And He still is. So if you're walking through the ashes, hold on. If the silence is deafening, keep praying. If your heart feels forgotten, you are not. He sees you. He knows you. He loves you. And maybe, just maybe, this valley you're walking through will be the very place where you see Him more clearly than ever before. Not just the God who gives, but the God who is enough. So today, if you still believe, if you're still holding on to hope in the silence, comment, "I trust you, God." Tag someone who needs this reminder. Follow for more stories of hope and healing, because your story is not over. Your pain is not wasted, and your silence is not empty. God is near, even in the ashes, even in the waiting, even in the silence. He is still God.